Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar of the 2020 Special Edition for Communities in Bloom. I'm Paul Bridges, National Chair of Communities in Bloom. And today we'll be hearing from our experts on community appearance, the old tidiness category, and heritage conservation. In July and August, we will be hosting 2 additional webinars on our other judging criteria. We hope you could participate. Looking at what we're doing this year, we'd really like to reach out and thank all of our Community in Bloom sponsors and partners at this time. Their contribution for our special edition and their support and along with our registered communities has made our program this year strong and robust, and we have to be very, very thankful for everything they've done for us. Dave, one of our CNLA staff working in the background, is going to give us just a quick slide as he can. He's helping us with our tech end today, just so we can let you get a chance to see all of our sponsors in case you're unaware. Dave, I know you're in there somewhere. Could you go to that sponsor slide, please, if possible? I'll just pause for a second. I know it might take a minute for a few people to join in. I understand there might be a slight time delay from video to screen. Thanks, Dave. So we have a number of people signing in from around the globe today, so thank you very much. And again, thank you so much to all of our sponsors. You've made our program possible, and all the communities that have joined in this year again, thank you very much to them. And I'd like to put a special thanks out to Devruman, who are sponsoring our Hope Tulip for this year for all our registered communities. If you have a moment, please take a look at some of our programming for what the Hope Tulip can do for your communities as well. So today, I'd like to welcome 2 of our Community in Bloom judges, Lorna and Larry Hall, and they'll be providing outstanding examples and ideas on community appearance and heritage conservation. Please feel free to ask your questions in the question and answer feature throughout this presentation, and we'll do our best to address them at the end. You can find the question and answer feature at the bottom of the screen. If it disappears, you just need to hover your mouse over that area of the screen. It should pop up again. And then right now, I'd like to introduce the first of our 2 speakers, Larry Hall. Larry was born and raised in Saskatchewan and completed his Bachelor of Education and a postgraduate diploma in educational administration. In 1999, he retired from the educational field, and Larry believes volunteering makes the community a better place to live. After retirement, he was the mayor of his village for 9 years. And that this introduction to the Communities in Bloom program convinced him that every community can benefit from being involved in the program. It was this that motivated Larry to become a provincial judge for the last 10 years. And today, Larry will be focusing on community appearance. Thank you, Larry.
I am muted. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for that introduction. Yes, today, community appearance, tidiness is what it was. Next slide, please. Tidiness includes an overall effort by the municipality, businesses, institutions, and residents throughout the whole community. Elements for evaluation are parks, green spaces, medians, boulevards, sidewalks. Sorry, I got an issue here. One second. There we go. Sidewalks, municipal, commercial, institution, and residential properties, ditches, road shoulders, vacant lots, signs, community buildings, weed control, litter cleanup, including cigarette butts and gum, graffiti prevention, removal, and vandalism deterrent programs. So it is a fairly comprehensive tidiness category. Next slide. What I've done is I've put together these slides that match the evaluation form. So the first part of that is first impressions. First impressions start as you enter the community and see the sign corridor that the community has. If it is too busy, really hard to read, and therefore probably not that valuable. But the sign corridor, and then your gateway. On the left, we have one a gateway going to a community on a lake. You notice the boats, landscaping around it, nicely mowed ditches. We're looking at best practices, and I think that's a pretty good example of a good gateway. On the right, not so nice, but I did want to point out in this one that the community has made an attempt. They've mowed back the growth from the side of the road. So maybe not what you would want, but I think it does show an effort toward tidiness and keeping things nice and clean. Next slide. Every municipality has to have bylaws regarding anti-litter, and some of what they have is mandated by the provincial government. Maintenance of vacant lots, nuisances, abandoned vehicles, and things like that. But whenever this is happening, we look for and should be able to see garbage containers, recycling containers, and I did want to point out the doggy bags as good practices. A lot of families have pets, and those pets need to get out and walk, and they do their jobs, and it is very unsightly and unhealthy to have that animal waste lying around. So the doggy bags, and then on the right you notice the doggy bag and a garbage container right beside it, and this happens as you enter the park walkway and as you leave it. So an important aspect in terms of best practices. Next slide. The municipality does have regulations and policies, and on the left here we have a little bit of graffiti. One of the policies that the community should have is the removal of graffiti within 24 hours of it appearing. One of the things that might help in that case is if the municipal employees in their vehicles had graffiti removal kits with them. So as they saw something, they could remove it immediately. The wall also has a mural. Murals are really nice. I like them because normally where there are murals, you don't see a lot of graffiti. So regulations regarding that, policies. On the right, a very simple sign, and signage is really important, but a simple sign. Why litter? So the promotion and not only regulations, but education of the public. And then below that, there's some details about how long various things last before they deteriorate. Next slide. Municipal cleanliness. Your main streets, well landscaped for sure. Garbage cans at the crosswalks. Buildings well maintained, and along with that, opportunities for community members to recycle. And this one in Jasper I thought was really kind of neat. I've seen a lot of places where they have places where individuals can deposit their recycling, and this was neat because it's on wheels. All the municipality has to do is hook up to it and haul it away. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way of handling the recycling issue. Next slide. Along with that, I did want to point out in terms of tidiness and in my mind, some safety issues too. We have a playground here, and the surface of the playground is actually rubberized, and it's probably 1 to 2 inches thick, and it's all been tested for drop heights, so it's very safe. Brand new playground, so some of the benches and receptacles aren't there yet, but a safety measure and a neatness measure, cleanliness measure that is really good. On the right, we have a lake with a walkway around it. I tried to show as much of the lake as I could, but garbage cans and benches, and wherever there were benches, there were garbage cans. And people are sitting, they will have lunch or whatever, and you got to have some place for them to put that waste material. They're not going to carry it a whole way around the lake, so it needs to be deposited right away. Next slide. Again, with cleanliness, I thought this was really a neat idea. Some communities, and maybe they have a little more money or whatever it is, but on the left, you notice a no dumping grates. They trying to keep things from going into the lake. Maybe it is a little bit of an issue for environmental as well, but tidiness and neatness. So they've actually embedded a little plaque into the cement by their storm channel grate. Really neat, maybe a little bit small, but again, education, signage to help promote cleanliness in the community. On the right, something very simple, and this was done by the school children, so it's not only providing that information to the adults in the community, but getting the kids involved, which is an important part of the program. So the kids simply have written on the sidewalk, hey, this drains to our lake, be careful what you put in there. Pretty neat little idea. Next slide. Next, please. The municipal properties, yeah, there we go. The municipal buildings, here we have a town office, well landscaped. You notice the recycling containers off on the left, no weeds. Really, most people coming into the community, if they're going to be looking for a residence or whatever, may check out the City Hall, and it's a building you want to have looking really good. On the right, a little pocket park, garbage containers, benches, and again, this is all municipal responsibilities, but a place to sit, visit with friends, and nice and neat, friendly, good place to relax. Next slide. So businesses and institutions are also looked at. Your left-hand slide is the TELUS building, nice walkway leading into it, no weeds, the benches, don't see any receptacles here for garbage, but well maintained. On the right, you're downtown. So I like this one because it is a well mulched bed. We're not seeing a lot of weed growth in that, and the building's certainly well maintained, a little bit of the flower pots. First impressions, you look at that, that's a pleasing sight, and the plantings on that street break up the starkness of some just barren cement brick streets that you might see in a community. Next slide. Again, that rubberized playground, some communities are now, because sidewalks are cracking and there's weed growth in them, are covering the entire sidewalk in this rubberized material. Obviously not as thick as a playground, but a nice soft surface to walk on. And one of the issues, I guess, is that people say that the rubberized surface is expensive, but I think if you take a look at the cost of taking apart the old cement, hauling it away, and then putting in new cement, the cost difference may not be a lot more than just going with the rubberized on top of the old cement, because it can level out the cracks for you nicely. On the right, a municipal building, but this is the fire hall. So I was thinking of it as a bit of an institution, I guess. Benches, flower beds, nice planting, a little bit of weed growth there. So that's one of the things that maybe needs to be looked at. I believe last week I referred to one of the ways of removing that is by using a hot Betty, which is basically a steamer that's used to melt ice out of the culverts during the spring. I misnamed it. It's called a hot seat, not a hot Betty. So my apologies to all the Bettys out there. The steamer is called a hot seat, and a lot of our municipalities have those. That's one way of removing that weed growth in sidewalks. It would be easy to get there. Next slide. Again, furniture. Some of our streets have the traffic calming build-outs, which kind of neat to breaks up that starkness of a main street. So you've got that. You've got on the left-hand side, a nice bike rack, freshly painted, and makes the street more usable by pedestrians rather than just cars flying up and down the street. Next slide. Municipal or residential properties. The one on the left I found really interesting. We certainly want to see tidiness and order in the residential properties. The one on the left, municipalities often have trouble maintaining and their boulevards, and it's difficult maybe to keep them all mowed and weed free. In this particular situation, the municipality has allowed the residents, or they asked, and sort of their policy is to allow residents to use the boulevard. So in this case, we have municipal boulevard is really part of the yard, and the resident is proud of what they've got there. So they're adding all of their the flowers, and I think you could probably do other things there as well. And then on the right, we have a very manicured backyard, and neat, tidy, pleasing to the eye. Next slide. I did not want to miss out on mentioning seniors' homes. So on the left, we have a seniors' home in a very small Saskatchewan community. And these people have, in this case, have all been farmers and maintain their lawns and their little properties, even though they don't own the property. They maintain that lawn, and they have a nice landscaped flower pot area. And not too much to look after, but do a very, very nice job of it. On the right, a yard that maybe isn't as well maintained, a little bit more natural, but I wanted to put that in to show you my granddaughter standing with the sunflower seeds. She's not as tall as them yet, but she's getting there. Next slide. Community participation. In both these slides, we have members of the CIB committees from the communities. Really important aspects of participation. But I did also want to point out one of the things that's happening in some of our communities is they're developing little mascots to help promote their program, because kids love to see the mascots. I believe there's a bloomer in Essex, Ontario, and here we have a little bee in Cold Lake, Alberta. And they go to the schools, they're involved in the parades, and become synonymous with the Communities in Bloom program. So, and again, promote community participation. Next slide. Again, community participation. We have a group of kids in the kids' garden. These children planted all the seeds. They are totally involved in the maintenance of the garden and in the harvesting. I was watching these little guys pull their carrots out of the ground, and they had the big smiles on their faces, so excited about what they had actually done. On the right, again, in terms of participation, encouraging biking. This is a welcome sign there. It was actually in Lewis, Delaware. It is a no smoking park. Here we sort of come to expect public buildings to be no smoking, but this was a no smoking park. And along with the sign, it's nice to have the sign, it's nice to have the policy and the regulation, but you also notice the cigarette butt container. So if you're going to tell people not to smoke, and if they're going to throw it on the ground, here's a place for them to put it, so it isn't causing the litter. Next slide. Next. This community has about close to 300 people in their Communities in Bloom committee. They certainly have an executive, and they consider all the people that are involved. So they had this group out maintaining the flower bed on this one corner, and I have a close-up of it on the other side. The other point I wanted to make here is that not everyone has to be a gardener. This Communities in Bloom committee actually has a branch or a division that are carpenters, and they have their own little workshop, and whenever anything needs to be built, and here they built all these flower boxes, and on this corner, on all four corners of this intersection, they have these flower boxes that are just absolutely lovely, done by their carpenter branch. And then the people that are more interested in the plants do the maintenance of that work. So it's again, something to consider. Not everybody has to be a gardener. There are other aspects to maintaining a nice looking community. Next slide. Community support. On the left, we have an old roundhouse in Hanna, Alberta that's being rejuvenated, and that is support, I guess, in labor. They're not providing a lot of money, but a huge amount of work going into that. So the Communities in Bloom committee, or I don't even want to call it committee, the people involved in Communities in Bloom aren't necessarily the gardeners. Here we have a group that is rejuvenating an old building. It's a CNR roundhouse, all sorts of litter and garbage left behind, and they had gone and cleaned it up, and we're now working on the building itself. On the right, we have what used to be an old gas station that has been converted into a beautiful park, a big fountain out in the lake. And again, I'll point out recycling and garbage containers with the benches. All of these things go together. Next slide. And my last slide is, again, community support. In this case, it was support for being involved in a library, but I thought it was really important to point out that everyone that's involved needs to be recognized. So here we have the backs of books, the binding of a book, listing the organizations that had been involved in the renovation of this library. That principle applies to all of the groups that are involved in maintaining the tidiness, appearance of a community. So if you have a group that's out picking up garbage, or just trimming trees, or recognition of them, whether it be a banquet or something as simple as this, is really important and very valuable. That is the end of my presentation, and I'll certainly be here for questions after Lorna has done her share. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Larry. That's some great information for us to take forward. Appreciate you taking the time to put all those pictures together for us. Our next speaker today is Lorna McElroy, and Lorna is a lifelong gardener and a lifelong learner. Over the years, she obtained her bachelor's and master's of education and has enjoyed 25 years in the classroom. As a trained horticultural judge for 30 years, she recently completed the Prairie Horticultural Certification Program having been a provincial, national, and international judge with Communities in Bloom for the past 16 years. Thanks for joining us today, Lorna, and please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks so much, Larry, for that very comprehensive coverage of community appearance. I enjoyed that. Hello, everyone. And please know that I am very happy to talk about heritage. I think cultural heritage comes easier to us, but natural heritage is sometimes undervalued and not showcased as much as it might be. So anything that I do today to further that, I'll be pleased. Now, Communities in Bloom is all about greening. And with the increased emphasis on green spaces, it makes sense that natural heritage is actually worth more points on your evaluation form than cultural heritage. It is 85 points, and cultural heritage is 65 for a total of 150. It's always important for a community to identify what is unique for them and then to celebrate that. And often that which is unique or a unique quality can be a natural heritage feature. Next, please. It's just natural heritage. And to show the importance of it at this community, they had this huge bulletin board with heritage pictures up for the judges, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything in their community. Next. I like this next because it's about seeds for the future. And this was at Olds, and the sign says, preserving roots from the past and seeds for the future. And that was up during their evaluation tour. And then from Manitoba, we have someone's collection of bean seeds, a whole lot of heritage bean seeds already for planting. Next. We will go to elements of biodiversity, which is what it's all about. And this is just an info panel, well done with information from Humboldt. Next. The flora and fauna are elements of diversity, the plants and the animals. And here we go from the lichen, and you notice that it's fenced for protection, but there is an information panel for you. And a huge heritage tree that the community has declared a heritage tree in Tignish, Prince Edward Island. Next, we go to Jurassic, the Jurassic era, just north of Gibbons. And they have their dinosaurs in a natural forest with lots of information. This one is on the horsetail and on the evolution of conifers. Next, we go to the East Coast. And next we have berries at Fogo, the town of Fogo. There we are. Just a great variety of berries when I was there, and they have a boardwalk through it so that the environment is protected. But if you look closely, there are so many berries there. And on to Leamington, Ontario with the cacti. Quite a display of cacti. And from there we go to the fauna on the next slide with just signage depicting Kindersley's watch for muskrats. And in Stettler, a very durable signage on their walking trail around their little lake. And this is on the Black Tern. So good identification there. Next, it's ecosystems. And this is the Black Marsh north of Tignish, Prince Edward Island, and Trail BC, where you can see the mural across the river and then information on the Columbia River and the Reconnect project. Next, we have the Bay Roberts with the Shearstown Estuary, and just a magical place between the river and the ocean, and a very protected area for the birds, and just a magical place to visit. Next, we go on to geological structures and formations. And this, of course, is not a natural formation here, but it is Newfoundland, and they're using what they have to beautify the landscape, and it is very, very striking. The next slide shows some old fossils. I'm just there to show you the immense size of those fossils, and they are petrified wood. They're cypress tree stumps that you would see in Florida. And this is just outside of Forestburg in Alberta. So very interesting. With all of our, next slide shows that with all of our natural heritage, we must pay attention to management, protection, and promotion. And for management, the next slide shows the management of ecosystems and eco parks. And next, we have an ecosystem with the management, and it's the watershed in Manitoba. And next, we have management of a park. On the next, it is a very small park. It's an ecology garden in Cobourg, Ontario. Very volunteer driven, very interesting, very educational. On to protection and all the facets on the next slide for protection of sensitive habitats, species at risk, pollinators, wildlife, grasslands, and wetlands. And the next slide shows sensitive habitat. And this, you'll notice that is a riparian area, importance for riparian areas. And I'm sure that you will look at that and you'll think, oh, that belongs in environment. But definitely it applies to both categories, that in protecting the riparian area, or protecting the natural heritage as well. And on to protection of species at risk. And this is the butterfly habitat to protect them. On to the next for protection of pollinators. And it does really look protected with that wire fence, but these are the beehives in a community garden area. On to protection of wildlife on the next one. And I really liked this signage at Bruderheim, Alberta. And because you can see that there's children have done some of the artwork that was incorporated into the signage. And we all know that when the young people have a hand and have a part in what is put up there, they will take care of it. And it has good information, and it has the student art. Next, protection of grasslands. This is a small area, and it was fenced and protected the Gibbons Badlands Prairie. A good information board on it, and then you get a small picture of the actual Badlands Prairie. And finally, under protection, it's protection of wetlands. Hampton, New Brunswick, and their marsh. Very well protected and appreciated. From protection, we go on to the next one, to promotion. And promotion includes naturalization, conservation groups, urban agriculture, communication, tourism, and year-round use and year-round programming. So just on to the next for naturalization. And this is again Tignish, and a natural area that is well promoted. Next, the conservation groups. These can be local, they can be provincial, they can be national or international. This is just one conservation group here. Urban agriculture is the next one. And of course, in our urban areas, there's a promotion of community gardens and gardening. And for the smaller communities, it's the promotion of the farms around the community. On to communication. And the communication on the next slide can take many forms. It can be a board, an info board like this. It can be any way that we can communicate to the public, to the community about our natural heritage. The next one is tourism. And this is from Dawson City in the Yukon. And yes, they know how to promote their tourism. And a lot of this promotion does center around their natural heritage. There is their cultural heritage, but their natural heritage is a big part of it too. And finally, year-round. On the next slide, year-round promotion of this. And this isn't the best example, but I couldn't resist it. It is from Leamington, Ontario, and it has 15 sites where you can dive to view shipwrecks. Now, I don't really believe that you can do it year-round, but Leamington is the southernmost point of Canada, so it is warmer than northern Alberta, that's for sure. But I just thought it was quite fascinating that you could choose the shipwreck that you wanted to dive down on a tour to explore. And so now we're going to turn to cultural heritage. And with cultural heritage, there's the tangible items and the intangible. And, you know, the tangible ones, it's your buildings, monuments, cemeteries, memorials, artifacts. And the intangible ones are your festivals and celebrations, your traditions and customs. And on to the next one. With our cultural heritage, we must look at the preservation of cultural heritage, the integration, and the activities that are associated with it. So moving on to preservation. On the next slide, we have preservation, and it is the preservation of everything. Buildings, cemeteries, artifacts, museums, monuments, trees and gardens, traditions, and culture. And the next slide will show the preservation of buildings. And that's the roundhouse at Hannah that Larry talked about. And that was very early in the game. As you can see, not a lot of work had been done there, but the plan was in place and the enthusiasm was there, and it's moving right along. And another example of a building preserved, maritime ones, Fogo and Hampton, two well-preserved buildings. And the next one shows a couple more examples. On the next slide, there we are. The stone building preserved, well signed. And then you'll notice Stettler, where the train station and the baggage cart and everything well preserved there, and part of tours in the summertime. On our next slide, we see a couple of vehicles and the preservation of these vehicles. And the first one, the driver is not as well preserved as the vehicle, and they did not actually let me drive it. But I moved to the back seat and someone else drove us about town in it. The next one over, you'll notice, is a recreational vehicle. Has all sorts of possibilities for summer use. And we're moving on to the next one on cemeteries. And the first example in Saskatchewan, and it's just that they went to a lot of effort and did a great job on their field of honor for their veterans. And I found it impressive. The next slide shows us a couple more. And of course, in some places, they refer to them as graveyards, more in the east, I believe, but this is one beside the church, a lot of history there in Newfoundland, and one in Jasper, and well kept, and there's a good map for people who visit to if they're looking for a particular person. On to the next one. It's more cemeteries, and this is Neepawa, Manitoba, and it's, you know, the home of Margaret Lawrence, the author of Stone Angel, and that's her house preserved on the right, and the cemetery with the Stone Angel in it on the left. And the next one, it's a cemetery on the next one that shows a very park-like setting. And you'll just be amazed at the water lilies. Isn't it beautiful? And the cemetery just in the background. And then Eckville, it's quite a new development, and it is for cremains to be interred there. And it is very, very nicely done. And next, the artifacts often preserved in the museums, but we enjoy seeing them wherever they are. On to larger objects that are preserved. On the next one, the Stettler train that I spoke of, and Forestburg, where you saw the fossils. This is the machine because it was at the site of a coal mine, and which was very important to the community at one time. And next, we have monuments. And this is a monument and so much more in Trail, BC, that it has, they reconstructed it, and it's the Italian culture. There's a museum inside. There's, you're just transported back to Italy and to everything there, including the grappa. But very well done. Next one, museums. So many museums, but this one, I just put it up because they had such a safe, effective way, it seemed, of displaying all their pictures and photo albums. They were accessible and yet they were protected. Just thought it was very clever. On to a museum in Dorval, Quebec, and they have a lot of these topiary type animals and throughout the city, but they have, this is outside the museum, and you see the little horse at the top, and then inside there were several of these decorative horses for various reasons, but a very interesting city to visit. Next, trees and gardens on the next one, the Millet Heritage Rose Garden in there, and the next will show us more trees and gardens with Jasper's giant tree. It is protected and signed and admired, and Amherstburg, Nova Scotia, with a heritage garden and the gardener in costume. Next, for traditions and customs that we are really more familiar with, and the tradition of fishing in Fogo, Newfoundland, throughout the whole community. It is very well done. And next we have another example. and it is also from our traditions, little place, Woking, Alberta, and this is a church out in the country, seldom used now, but well preserved to show people. And Redwater, Alberta, with their pisanka, their Ukrainian decorated eggs, and those are the traditions that we like to see and admire. And next, it's the third is integration of our cultural heritage, and that's integrating that heritage into our streetscapes and our landscapes. The next slide will show a streetscape. It's a chainsaw carving, Chetwynd, BC, and it's right on the street and really tells a lot of history. And the next one is the landscape, and those are millstones in Amherst, Nova Scotia, millstones used as steps going into that museum. And then the authentic streetscape of Orangeville, Ontario. And next, we have the heritage landscape, where we see this quite a bit, where farm implements are planted and used in the landscape to reflect the history of the community. Moving on now to activities. And the activities consist of celebrations, festivals, traditions, customs. And the next slide will show a celebration. It's an evening concert outdoors, and Cobourg, Ontario. Very, very interesting. The next slide shows a festival. And I should apologize, the best festival I could find was Rib Fest. Rib Fest in Orangeville, Ontario, but it is a festival, and there are so many others. Next slide shows tradition. And there are so many traditions. This one is a totem pole carving in BC near Mission, and it's just a work in progress there. And again, the next one is customs. And there are so many, many here. This is a Newfoundland quilt, but quilting is common right across Canada. And so I just used that one as an example, as one example. Now, as a judge for Communities in Bloom, I've been fortunate to visit all 10 provinces and the Yukon Territory. And so for me, it was a wonderful trip down memory lane putting this presentation together. They are all Canadian examples. My apologies to the international guests today. I could certainly have used some of those. And I will say that at times the word expert bothered me. And at times the words best ideas bothered me a bit. Now, so when I use a community to illustrate a feature, you might think, oh, we did that first, or we did that better. However, any time that a community fulfills an objective on our evaluation form, it makes it a better community. And as long as we are making our communities better places to live, work, play, and visit, we're all winners. So thank you.
Wonderful. Lorna, thank you very much for that. I think all of us probably have a feel that we've just traveled coast to coast to coast. So I know your portfolio and photo collection must be much larger than that. So thanks for taking us through those items. At this point in the program, we do have a few minutes left. So I'd like to remind everyone, if they do have an active question, you can hover your mouse over the bottom of the screen, and we've got a question and answer section. We can work through that. While we're waiting to see if anyone does have any questions, I'm going to ask a question that came in earlier to both Lorna and Larry. And it's a just simply, what are the judges looking at on first impressions coming into a community?
Well, for me, as I said, it starts with the sign corridor leading into the community, going into the gateway, mowed ditches, no litter. Those are the first impressions. You know, I remember, Lorna, I didn't mention any community names. I was wondering whether you were paid to do that by them. But I remember going into Maple Creek, and it's down a little bit lower than the road leading into it. So in terms of first impressions, like I was really impressed with the urban forest, and not related to tidiness, but as you drive into Maple Creek, you see it's just a green, mass of green. It's beautiful. So it's a tough question to answer, but certainly the neatness, tidiness, and just pleasing to the eye.
Mhm. Yes, so true, Larry. And I know that as judges, we have to be careful that we are always objective, that we are not being subjective and using our own ideas and preferences and standards. But by the same token, I think for me, it is when I see a community first impression, it is, would people like to live here? Would people like to visit here? You know, is this a good place to be?
Great. Well, both
I believe I had a question on one of the garbage cans. I just noticed it in the chat. The garbage containers, and I think the question was related to the one in the old gas station area. They were not in ground. The community felt because it was back in the park a ways, it would be difficult, because often those get very heavy because they're deeper down in the ground, and you almost need some type of mechanical device to get the receptacle pulled out of the container.
Thanks for that, Larry. Again, people are being a little bit quiet today, so I'm going to ask a previously asked question. And we had something come in for a community. They had said they've been trying really hard with continuous improvement to get extra points in their community appearance category. What are some next steps after, as they get started, to boost their scores?
Well, it depends on what they've done to begin with, but certainly graffiti. That's one of the things that sticks out like a sore thumb. So we're getting rid of that. So having the policies and procedures in place to remove it, like not only. Well, one of the really big issues that I find really interesting, that some communities have all sorts of policies and bylaws, but no way to enforce them and no way to follow through on what they would like to see happen. So, like, again, to answer that specific question, I guess we got to know what's happened so far. But for me, graffiti is a big no-no, and certainly litter is very unsightly.
Lorna?
Well, I would just add that probably they have tackled the big issues first. Probably they have taken care of the big issues. Now look at the small ones. You know, cigarette butts in the cracks in the sidewalk, weeds. Just start looking for details, and because they do make a difference.
Great, thank you. Other questions that have come in regards to the signage and murals through town. What do you think would be the best way for a community to start putting a mural program together?
Well, you certainly need to have a group of individuals that are interested in doing that. And I've seen all sorts of different ways of approaching the issue of murals. If you have the resources to contract a professional mural painter, is one way to go. And there are some communities that are just almost overloaded with murals. I've seen, and we have one in our own community where we had 2 professional artists work with the school kids. And there's so many, like, so many pictures that a person could put up. What they did is we live on a lake, so they've got this great big fish. And if you're across the street looking at the mural, all you see, and the whole mural is blue, but you see this dark blue fish and blue around it. But if you come across the street to the mural and look at it, you can see each of the different children that were involved in doing the mural have painted what our community means to them. So there's pictures of our local fish and chip store, which is world famous here in Regina Beach. And there's pictures of people on the beach. And so you get to see the details. Now that mural's been up for at least 10 years now. Nobody has laid a finger on it. And we coated it really well. I forget the name of the material that goes on top of the paint, but it's just like the day we put it up. That's another way of going. That's sort of a professional artists and children being involved are really good. A simpler thing yet is if you can get an outline of something done and then have children come in and just paint it, which is, I don't want to say a lower level, but a more entry level perhaps in terms of getting a mural done. If you're going to do a mural, I would recommend that mural have some meaning to the community. Don't do a mural for the sake of a mural. We live on a lake. Our mural is a big fish. If you have a railroad history in your community, maybe something like that could be part of your mural.
Great. Thank you, Larry.
I would just add on a practical note that if a community is new to the idea of murals, be sure to contact other communities in kind of similar climatic conditions that have murals, and make sure that you have the best possible base and that the best paint and a coating that will be safe. Just do that work first so that your mural will last.
Great, thank you. We had a comment come in from Bob Iveson. Bob joined us on our last webinar, and he brought a good point forward about making sure the mural also has an explanation behind it, promoting the purpose of it, the details in maybe in its construction or the story it's telling, but and tying that into tourism. So really making that as a great piece to tell the story of the community or the area or the park. So Bob, thank you for that comment.
Yeah, as I say, the mural shouldn't be done just for the sake of the mural. It needs to have some meaning to the community.
Wonderful. So I think we are actually out of time for today. You both gave us really great presentations and helped us walk through some continued ideas on how we can take our communities and continue to move them forward. Our next webinar is, we're talking about landscape and floral displays, and that will be on Thursday, July 30th at 1 p.m. And then on August 28th at 1 p.m., that's Eastern time, we're working on urban forestry and environmental action. So Lorna and Larry, thank you so very much for joining us today. Thank you to all the communities. And again, thank you sponsors. We very much appreciate everyone's support through these times, and wish you all well as you continue through the summer in your gardens. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.